I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
The palace expected a quiet signature, a private approval, a royal adjustment that would pass through the corridors without thunder. But Princess Anne saw the name, saw the missing vote, and stopped everything cold. In one moment, a routine appointment became a constitutional tremor inside the House of Windsor, because this was not only about Camilla. It was about power, process, and who still had the courage to say no. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her hand moved across the table and came down over the appointment folder before Charles could reach the final page, and that single gesture cut through the room like a blade. The Royal Foundation, the charitable organization tied to royal public work, patronage, and long-term legacy, was not just another name on palace paper. A trustee, a person given formal authority to help guide an organization, would hold influence over causes, image, donors, and the moral direction the monarchy wanted the public to believe in. That was why this mattered. That was why Anne's face hardened when she saw Camilla's proposed appointment without the council vote, the formal approval from a small senior group meant to stop private preference from becoming royal policy. Charles felt the humiliation before anyone spoke it. The king had wanted this to look simple, almost tender, a sign of trust in his wife, a quiet confirmation that Camilla belonged not only beside him, but inside the machinery of legacy itself. Yet the monarch also understood the danger in Anne's silence. She was not challenging his affection. She was challenging his method, and inside that difference lay the first crack. Camilla's name sat on the front of the folder, neat and final, but the missing confirmation page turned that name into a question no one in the room could escape. Anne felt betrayal burn beneath her restraint. To her, loyalty to the crown, the living symbol of royal authority and duty, never meant protecting a shortcut. It meant stopping one before it damaged everything. She looked once at the aides near the wall, and the aides looked down, because both understood what her hand on that file meant. This was no delay. This was an intervention. Charles had been moments from signing. The Queen Consort had been moments from gaining a powerful place, and Anne had frozen the entire plan with nothing more than discipline and nerve. The room changed after that. No one admitted fear, but everyone felt it. If the council vote was missing, then someone had pushed the appointment too far, too fast. If Camilla knew, the wound would be personal. If she did not, the betrayal would be even deeper. And before the palace could understand why Anne acted so sharply, it had to face the people at the center of the fracture, and what each of them stood to lose. This was never just an administrative dispute. For Charles, it was trust. For Camilla, it was recognition. For Anne, it was duty. And for William, it was a warning about the future he would one day inherit. One trustee seat became a mirror, reflecting years of buried resentment, quiet loyalty, and the fragile line between family affection and royal responsibility. Charles wanted Camilla secured inside a structure that carried far more weight than charity work. The Royal Foundation, already explained as the royal family's public service engine, mattered because it shaped causes, campaigns, donor trust, and the image of the monarchy's future. For the king, placing the Queen Consort near that work felt like protection. It told the palace that she was not an outsider waiting at the edge of royal history. She was part of it. But Anne saw the same move differently. To her, the council papers, the formal records proving a senior approval had happened, were not a small detail. They were the guardrail between order and personal pressure. Camilla received the news in private and went still. The Queen Consort had lived through judgment before, but this cut deeper because it came from within the family walls. She did not ask first about the public. She asked whether Anne had truly stopped it. That question carried pain, because she knew what the answer meant. Her place was still being measured, Her acceptance was still being tested, and Charles, who had expected his decision to comfort her, now had to face the fact that his attempt to lift her had exposed her again. William heard the details and chose his words carefully. The prince respected his father, but he also understood what a rushed appointment could do to the foundation's credibility. If the public believed royal influence could move faster than formal approval, then every future project connected to him and Catherine could be questioned. That was why he later spoke quietly with Anne, away from aides, and admitted he had already noticed something strange in the incomplete council papers. The future king had not moved against Charles, but he had not ignored the warning either. Anne listened without triumph. She was not pleased to be right. She was angry that the situation had reached this point at all. The Princess Royal had spent her life respecting tradition, because she knew tradition was not decoration. It was protection. Charles had expected resistance from courtiers, perhaps even from legal advisors, but not from his sister. That made the wound personal. It was not the institution pushing back. It was blood. And that made the silence between them heavier. The family pressure tightened from every side. Camilla felt exposed. Charles felt challenged. William felt the future shifting under his feet. Anne felt the old rules bending too far. And the truth was, her refusal did not begin in that room. It began weeks earlier, during a ceremony no one realized would become the point of no return. Every palace crisis has a moment people later remember differently. A glance, a sentence, a hand placed where it should not have been. For Anne, that moment came during the Windsor Legacy reception, when a ceremonial speech about the royal foundation shifted into something sharper. What sounded polite to the room sounded dangerous to her. And from that evening onward, she began watching every document. Anne heard the words before most people understood their weight. Camilla had spoken of future stewardship of the foundation, and the phrase landed softly in the room, wrapped in calm royal language. The Windsor Legacy reception was a private royal gathering, built around legacy, charity, and public service. And that mattered, because speeches there were never casual. They were signals. The Royal Foundation, already known as the family's public service body, carried influence over causes, reputation, and the future shape of royal duty. So when the Queen Consort used words that sounded like authority before any council vote had happened, Anne felt something inside her go cold. Charles smiled during the speech, and that smile troubled her more than the words themselves. The king looked proud, almost relieved, as if Camilla's place had already been accepted by the room. Anne watched him, and felt a sharp disappointment she did not show. To her, affection had begun moving faster than protocol. A council vote, the formal approval from senior royal decision-makers, was not decoration. It was the line that stopped private wishes from becoming public authority. If that line could be crossed quietly once, it could be crossed again. Camilla noticed the change in Anne's face. The Queen Consort carried herself with control, but later, away from the reception, she asked Charles whether she had said something wrong. That question revealed what her smile had hidden. She wanted recognition, but she feared rejection. She wanted a place in the foundation, but she knew every step toward deeper royal influence would be measured, judged, and challenged. Charles tried to calm her, yet even he could not erase the look Anne had given from across the room. Anne's fear hardened the next morning, when a senior aide delivered a draft briefing to her office. The page already described Camilla as incoming trustee, as if the appointment had moved beyond discussion and into fact. The Princess Royal read it once, then again, and the quiet anger in her grew sharper. A briefing was not a final order, but inside palace machinery, wording often became momentum. She folded the page carefully and placed it inside her private diary, not as gossip, but as proof. The pattern became impossible to ignore. First came the speech, then came the draft briefing, then came the missing vote. Anne was no longer dealing with one mistake. She was watching a decision being prepared before approval had been earned. So when the door closed and Charles reached for the pen, she was not merely objecting, she was carrying the weight of everything she had already seen. The confrontation did not begin with shouting, it began with silence. Charles looked at the papers. Anne looked at the missing page. Camilla sat still, sensing the air harden around her. Then Anne spoke with the kind of calm that made every aide in the room wish they were somewhere else. She did not accuse. She did something worse. She asked one question Charles could not answer. Charles had entered the meeting expecting control. The king believed the appointment file would move quickly, because the decision had already been shaped in private conversations and softened by careful palace language. The appointment file, the formal set of papers used to approve a royal role or position, sat open before him, carrying Camilla's name as proposed trustee. A trustee, in simple terms, is someone trusted with legal and moral responsibility over an organization's direction. That mattered, because the foundation was not only about charity. It carried the image of royal service, public trust, and the future reputation William would one day inherit. Anne saw the gap immediately. The council vote record was missing. That record was supposed to prove that senior approval had taken place before the king's signature gave the decision force. Anne saw the king's signature. She looked at Charles and asked, "Where is the vote?" The words did not shake, but the room did. The monarch's face tightened, because the challenge had happened in front of Camilla, William, and two aides who suddenly understood they were witnessing something dangerous. Anne was not asking for a missing page. She was asking whether the crown had tried to move around its own guardrails. Camilla felt the humiliation rise around her. The queen consort had not spoken, yet her name had become the center of the confrontation. She had wanted recognition, not exposure. She had wanted a place that proved she belonged, not a moment that made her look like the reason procedure had been bent. Charles turned slightly toward her, as if he wanted to protect her from the blow, but even that small movement made Anne's point stronger. This was exactly what she feared: affection becoming pressure, and pressure becoming policy. William stayed quiet, and that silence cut deeper than any speech. The prince did not defend his father at once. He lowered his eyes to the file, then to the empty space where the vote record should have been, and Charles noticed. The future king's restraint told everyone that Anne's concern had weight. The king tried to frame the appointment as royal discretion, the monarch's freedom to make certain decisions. But Anne answered firmly that discretion could guide a choice, not replace approval. Charles finally set the pen down. The sound was small, but the consequence was enormous. Camilla did not move. William remained still. Anne kept her hand close to the file, as if the paper itself could not be trusted. The meeting had not ended the conflict. It had only pushed it deeper. Once the pen stopped moving, the palace had to confront the darker question: who truly controlled the foundation, and who was trying to shape its future? The royal foundation did not need a crown to carry royal weight. Its influence lived in meetings, patronages, donor confidence, public campaigns, and the future image of the monarchy itself. That is why Anne understood the danger. A trustee seat was not ceremonial. It was access. It was influence. It was the ability to shape the story the next generation would inherit. William understood that weight better than anyone wanted to admit. The prince knew the foundation was not just a charity platform. It was the public engine of royal service, the place where causes became legacy, and legacy became trust. A patronage meant official support given to a cause or organization. And that support mattered, because it told the public what the monarchy wanted to stand for. If Camilla entered that structure without a proper vote, the future king knew every campaign linked to him, Catherine, and the next generation could suddenly look less like service and more like family politics. Charles felt the pressure closing around him. The king had wanted one act of confidence to settle years of doubt around Camilla, but now that same act made his authority look smaller. He had worn the crown, made the decision, and expected the room to follow. Instead, Anne had forced everyone to pause. That wounded him deeply, not because the process mattered less to him, but because his own sister had made restraint visible. For a monarch, visible restraint can feel like weakness, even when it is the only thing saving the institution from damage. William's concern sharpened when a courtier came to him with an internal scheduling note. A courtier is a senior palace staff member who manages royal duties, briefings, and private arrangements. And this one knew the note was dangerous. It had already prepared Camilla's first foundation briefing, listing times, names, and talking points as if her trustee role had quietly begun. The prince read it in silence. Then he read it again. The appointment was not waiting for approval. It was moving as if approval was already guaranteed. Anne discovered the same pattern from another direction. The Princess Royal learned that briefing materials had been drafted, staff slots had been arranged, and Camilla's office had already been folded into the foundation timetable. That was the phrase that mattered: operationally active. It meant the palace machine had begun treating the queen consort as part of the structure before the council had agreed. Anne did not explode. She became colder, because now the missing vote was not a mistake. It was part of a wider push. The consequence came fast. Meetings paused. Calls stopped. Staff who had been ready to move forward were told to wait. Charles felt the embarrassment of delay. William felt the danger of what had nearly happened. Anne felt the heavy relief of stopping it in time. And Camilla, whose name sat at the center of every frozen page, became the one forced to carry the humiliation. The machinery stopped. The meetings paused. And behind one closed door, she finally understood what Anne's intervention had cost her. Camilla had survived public judgment before. She had learned how to smile through whispers, walk through storms, and sit beside a crown that never fully protected her from scrutiny. But this was different. This wound came from inside the family. The door closed, the room emptied, and for the first time that day, the queen consort allowed herself to stop pretending she was untouched by it. Camilla sat alone and removed her gloves slowly, as if every small movement needed control. The foundation briefing had been cancelled, her trustee preparation had been paused, and palace staff had been told not to proceed. A briefing, in plain words, is a private preparation meeting where royal roles, duties, and public messages are planned before action begins. That cancellation mattered because it told everyone the appointment was no longer moving forward quietly. It had been stopped. And because her name was attached to the file, the pause felt like rejection, wearing the mask of procedure. Charles entered with the careful tenderness of a man who knew comfort might not be enough. The king tried to reassure her that this was only a delay, only a process issue, only a formal correction before the council vote could be scheduled and recorded. But his voice did not carry the certainty she needed. The council vote, the formal approval from senior royal decision-makers, now stood between Camilla and the role he had wanted to give her. That mattered, because without it, the appointment would always look forced. And for the monarch, that truth was painful. Camilla looked at him and asked the question he feared. Did he know the vote had not happened? The queen consort did not ask loudly. She asked softly, and that made it worse. Charles paused, just long enough for the answer to form without words. He had known enough to understand the risk, perhaps not enough to expect Anne to stop him. But hesitation has its own language. Camilla heard it. She lowered her eyes, wounded not only by the delay, but by the thought that she had been placed at the center of a fight she had not been allowed to fully see. Anne learned more before the day was over. An aide informed her that Camilla's office had requested a rewritten foundation timetable, changing dates, removing old briefing slots, and softening language that had once sounded final. The Princess Royal understood what that meant. The original plan had been further advanced than anyone had admitted. Her intervention had not interrupted an idea. It had interrupted a machine already in motion. The fallout hardened everyone. Camilla felt exposed. Charles felt the shame of having failed to protect her. Anne felt no victory, only the cold confirmation that her fear had been right. The Queen Consort's silence became part of the crisis, and the King's uncertainty became impossible to hide. And when brother and sister finally stood alone, the argument stopped being about Camilla's name on a file and became about the soul of the crown. Without aids, the room felt smaller. Without papers, the truth felt heavier. Charles and Anne had shared a lifetime inside duty, grief, discipline, and silence. But this time, silence could not protect either of them. He wanted loyalty, she demanded order. And somewhere between those two things, the monarchy's oldest wound opened again. Family love versus royal obligation. Charles stood before his sister as a monarch, but Anne heard the brother beneath the crown. The king did not begin with anger. He began with exhaustion. He told her Camilla had endured enough public rejection, enough judgment, enough years of being treated as someone who had to earn every inch of acceptance twice. The crown, in simple words, means the authority and duty carried by the monarch, not only the person wearing it. That mattered because Charles had confused two needs at once: the need to protect his wife and the need to protect the institution that gave his words power. Anne listened, and for the first time that day, her face softened. She understood pain. She understood loyalty. But the Princess Royal did not move from the truth. She told Charles that protecting Camilla could not mean creating a precedent that weakened every future decision. A precedent is an earlier action that becomes an example for later choices. And this one mattered because one shortcut today could become a dangerous habit tomorrow. If a trustee role could be pushed without proper approval, then another role could be pushed the same way, and then another, until procedure became performance. Charles admitted what he had not said in the meeting. He wanted Camilla safe from another public wound. The king wanted the appointment completed before doubt could gather around it, before critics could turn the foundation into a battlefield, before his wife had to feel rejected again. That confession changed the air between them. Anne no longer saw only a monarch forcing a decision. She saw a man trying to shield someone he loved, even if the shield itself had become the danger. Anne answered with quiet force. She told him that Camilla could still be considered, but only through the same formal process as anyone else. The council vote had to happen first. The approval had to be recorded. The appointment had to stand on legitimacy, not speed. Charles looked away, then finally nodded. It was not surrender. It was recognition. The king understood that Anne had not stopped him to wound him. She had stopped him before the crown wounded itself. The agreement between them became the turning point. Camilla would not be erased. Charles would not be openly defied. Anne would not withdraw her objection. The process would be restored. But outside that room, the delay could not stay hidden for long. Staff had already paused meetings. Timetables had already changed. Too many people knew the appointment had frozen. By morning, the private fracture had escaped the walls, and Britain was no longer watching a family disagreement, it was watching a test of royal accountability. The palace had tried to contain the pause, but silence has its own sound. By sunrise, the story had found its image. Anne standing firm, Charles forced to wait, Camilla's appointment frozen. What began as a private objection became a public verdict on fairness inside the monarchy. And for once, the question was not whether the family could survive scandal, it was whether procedure had saved them from one. Camilla felt the sting before anyone explained the damage. The Queen Consort's name had moved from private papers to public headlines, and every word made the pause feel like a rejection. The appointment delay mattered because it showed the palace could not simply move a senior royal into a powerful role without visible approval. The council vote, already explained as the formal approval needed from senior decision-makers, became the phrase every broadcaster repeated. That detail mattered because it gave the public something clear to understand. Anne had not blocked emotion. She had demanded process. Charles watched the reaction turn against his intention. The king had wanted loyalty to his wife to look steady and dignified, but now it looked like a question of judgment. Broadcasters framed the story as a rare internal correction, the kind of palace moment where discipline came from inside the family rather than from outside pressure. Anne became the symbol of that correction. She was not shown as cruel, she was shown as firm. And that made Charles more frustrated, because the more reasonable his sister appeared, the harder it became for him to defend why the vote had not happened first. The front page made everything impossible to soften. One major newspaper carried the stark headline, "Anne Block's Foundation Move Council Vote Demanded." Those words landed like a public stamp on a private wound. Camilla saw the headline and understood that her name had become shorthand for a stopped appointment. Charles saw it and understood that his personal loyalty had become national debate. Anne saw it and did not celebrate, because she knew public praise could be as dangerous as public blame when family pain sat underneath it. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates, turning a palace delay into a national conversation. A woman facing the cameras said, "Anne did what the rules required," and that single line captured the public mood better than any official statement. The palace response stayed controlled, confirming only that the proper council process would be followed before any final trustee decision. But the message behind the wording was clear. The appointment was frozen. The vote mattered. The shortcut had failed. Public opinion began to settle around Anne's firmness, and that changed the pressure inside the palace. Camilla felt exposed, Charles felt judged, and Anne felt the heavy cost of being proven right. The monarchy had avoided one scandal, but it had created a reckoning. The headlines faded, the gates emptied, and inside the palace, one final choice remained: whether the crown would treat Anne's stand as rebellion or as rescue. In the end, Anne did not stop a woman. She stopped a shortcut. That was the verdict that settled over the palace when the foundation appointment was formally delayed until a council vote could be held. Charles had been checked, Camilla had been wounded, William had been warned, and the monarchy had been reminded that even affection must kneel before duty. Anne returned the unsigned file with calm hands and a face that carried no victory. The foundation appointment was not destroyed, but it was formally halted until the council vote could be completed and recorded. That mattered, because a halt is different from a rejection. It meant Camilla could still be considered, but only through the proper path. It also meant the palace had accepted something serious. No trustee appointment connected to the foundation could move forward on personal will alone. A precedent, meaning a decision that guides future actions, had now been set inside the family. Charles felt the weight of that precedent more deeply than anyone said aloud. The king had wanted to protect Camilla from another public wound, but he now understood that his urgency had nearly created a larger crisis of confidence. He had tried to make acceptance feel certain. Instead, he had made the process look uncertain. That realization humbled him. The monarch did not lose his authority in that moment, but he was forced to see what Anne had seen first. Authority becomes weaker when it appears to move around the rules that protect it. Camilla absorbed the pain in silence. The queen consort knew the delay would follow her name, and she knew some would call it a defeat. But she also understood the harder truth. Any future acceptance would mean more if it came through legitimacy, not pressure. She had wanted recognition, but recognition forced through speed would always carry a shadow. Charles could offer love. The palace could offer titles. But only process could offer the kind of standing no headline could easily tear apart. William watched the final decision and took the lesson into himself. The prince understood that Anne had not weakened the crown. She had protected it from looking careless. For the future king, the message was sharp and unforgettable. Process was not an enemy of authority. It was the shield around it. If the monarchy wanted trust in the years ahead, then even its most personal decisions had to survive public reason and private discipline. Anne's final gesture said everything. She placed the file back before Charles, still unsigned, and told him the crown was strongest when no one was allowed to move above the rules. The king accepted the vote. Camilla accepted the cost. William accepted the warning. And Anne accepted the loneliness that often comes with being right, before anyone is ready to admit it. This moment meant the monarchy chose discipline over convenience, procedure over favoritism, and duty over personal comfort. Anne's stand did not break the family. It forced the family to remember why the crown survives. There is no unresolved ending here. Anne stopped the appointment, Charles accepted the vote, Camilla faced the cost, and the monarchy walked away bruised but steadier than before. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.